The passenger who wasn't there. Lena slumped into the empty subway car, exhausted from her late shift. The train doors slid shut with a hiss, and the dim lights flickered as the train rumbled forward. She was alone, except for a man sitting at the far end. His face was obscured by the shadows, his body completely still. Lena ignored him and pulled out her phone. No service. With a sigh, she glanced out the window, watching the tunnel blur past. That's when she noticed something strange. In the reflection, the man was sitting closer. Her breath caught. She whipped her head around. He hadn't moved. He was still at the far end. Her pulse quickened. She looked back at the reflection. He was now right behind her. A cold, crawling sensation spread across her spine. Slowly, she turned her head. Nothing. The seat behind her was empty. A whisper, dry as dead leaves, brushed her ear. "I used to sit here too." Lena jumped up, stumbling toward the doors. The train wasn't slowing. The next station should have appeared by now, but outside was nothing but endless, swirling darkness. She turned back. The man was standing now, impossibly tall, his face a blurred void. The lights flickered. For a brief moment, the entire train was full of people without faces. The lights flickered again. The train was empty. The doors finally opened to a station she didn't recognize. The sign simply read, "Last stop." Lena hesitated, but a force pushed her out. The doors slammed shut behind her. The train pulled away, and inside through the window she saw herself, still sitting in her seat. Nowhere route. It was late, and the subway station was nearly empty. Ben hated working overtime, but he had no choice. He caught the last train home, stepping into a nearly deserted car. Only a few passengers were scattered across the dimly lit space. A woman with long, tangled hair staring at the floor, a man in a wrinkled suit hunched over, and a teenage girl absently scrolling through her phone. Ben sighed and took a seat near the middle. The train doors slid shut, and the subway lurched forward. He leaned against the window, exhausted, watching the tunnels blur past. Minutes ticked by. Something felt wrong. The train wasn't stopping. He glanced at the digital display above the doors. The station names were gone, replaced with a single pulsing word, "Nowhere." A cold chill ran down his spine. He looked at the other passengers, expecting confusion, but none of them reacted. The woman still stared at the floor. The man in the suit remained hunched over, his body unnaturally stiff. The girl kept scrolling, but the screen of her phone was black. Ben swallowed hard. "Excuse me," he said, his voice unsteady. "Is this train skipping stops?" No one answered. He turned to the girl, waving a hand in front of her face. She didn't blink. Her fingers swiped at the dead screen over and over as if caught in a loop. His stomach clenched. He turned to the man in the suit, hesitating before shaking his shoulder. "Sir!" The man collapsed forward. Ben jumped back, a strangled cry escaping his throat. The man's body folded unnaturally, as if hollow. His head lolled to the side, revealing empty, gaping eye sockets. The train lights flickered. Ben spun toward the woman. She was standing now, her head twitching in sharp, unnatural jerks. The lights flickered again. She was closer. The train's hum deepened into a low, vibrating growl. The windows darkened, no longer showing the tunnels, only a swirling void. Ben ran to the doors, slamming his fists against them. "Let me out!" he screamed. A voice crackled over the intercom, static filled and distorted. End of the line. The train jerked violently. Ben fell to the floor. The woman loomed over him, her head tilting as she opened her mouth. It stretched impossibly wide, revealing endless darkness. The lights went out. The last thing Ben heard was the screech of the train and a wet, slithering whisper. The next morning, the subway ran as usual. A train arrived at Ben's station, doors hissing open. Passengers stepped inside, taking seats, staring at their phones. Among them sat a new figure, a man in a wrinkled suit, hunched forward, unmoving. His hollow eyes stared at nothing, and the train kept moving. The last bus. The bus was nearly empty when Jake stepped in. Just an old man in the back, a woman staring blankly out the window, and the driver, his eyes unreadable in the rearview mirror. Jake took a seat near the middle. The bus rattled forward, the city lights flickering past. Something felt off. The woman turned her head slightly. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Jake's stomach twisted. Was she talking to him? He leaned closer. A whisper, dry and distant, slipped through the air. "Get off at the next stop." He blinked. The woman's lips weren't moving anymore, but her eyes, wide, unblinking, were locked onto his. Jake swallowed hard. He turned to the old man in the back, looking for reassurance. But the old man wasn't normal. His mouth was hanging open, far too wide, his jaw unhinged. His sunken eyes gleamed with something inhuman. The lights flickered. The bus groaned. Jake shot up from his seat. The driver met his gaze in the mirror. A grin spread across his face, too many teeth lining his mouth. "Next stop," the driver rasped, though the bus wasn't slowing down. The old man rose, his movements unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. The woman stood too, her head tilting at an impossible angle. Jake ran to the doors, pounding on them. The driver chuckled. The bus kept moving. Outside, the city blurred into darkness, shapes shifting, twisting. The street signs were wrong, the buildings melted. Jake turned back. The passengers stood around him now, their faces stretching, distorting. The driver spoke again. "There is no next stop."